Bangor in Maine is a historic city nestled along the Penobscot River. Its past is rooted in the lumber industry, earning it the nickname the lumber capital of the world in the 19th century. By the 1980s, Bangor had evolved into a quiet, picturesque community, but beneath this exterior lay a deeply conservative culture that reflected the broader societal prejudices of the time. In the 1980s, homophobia was widespread across much of the United States, including Bangor. LGBTQ+ individuals faced harassment, discrimination and violence, often finding little support even from institutions meant to protect them. But amidst the hostility, there was one man who lived openly, 23-year-old Charlie Howard. Defiant against the norms of that time, Charlie embraced his identity, refusing to hide who he was. One summer night in July of 1984, Charlie walked arm in arm with his boyfriend across a bridge in downtown Bangor. The quiet night was shattered when a car filled with teenagers pulled up beside them. The taunts began, but the boys weren't done. Within moments, Charlie would find himself in a desperate fight for his life, an event that would haunt Bangor and forever change its history. Charlie Howard always knew that he was different. Born in Portsmouth, New Hampshire in 1961, he was small-boned and fragile, burdened with asthma and a learning disability that made childhood all that more challenging. While the other kids raced towards the playground or played sports, Charlie often sat on the sidelines, longing to join in. His classmates were quick to spot his vulnerability and labelled him a sissy. As he grew older, Charlie began to understand that there was another reason that he didn't fit in. While the boys around him started noticing girls, Charlie found himself drawn to other boys. He kept this secret for as long as he could, but teenagers have a way of sniffing out differences. The taunts of sissy turned sharper, crueler, and more homophobic. High school became a battleground he endured day by day. By the time the graduation approached, Charlie had no desire to walk across the stage. He feared his family might witness the hate his classmates barely bothered to hide. Eventually coming out to his parents was terrifying, but ultimately worth it. Although it was difficult for them to process at first, they grew to accept him for who he was. But still, acceptance at home didn't fix everything. Charlie's poor grades kept him from college, and jobs in Portsmouth were scarce, scarcer still for an openly gay man in the early 1980s. Living at home with his mother and stepfather only added to his frustrations. He and his stepfather often clashed, leaving Charlie feeling stifled and out of place. Determined to carve out a life for himself, Charlie packed up his belongings and left Portsmouth behind. For the next couple of years he drifted, staying in hostels, picking up odd jobs and searching for a place he could belong. He eventually settled in Ellsworth in Maine, where he moved in with a man. But the relationship fell apart in early 1984, leaving Charlie uprooted once more. With few options, Charlie decided to try his luck in Bangor. A mutual friend introduced him to Scott Hamilton and Paul Nodin, a couple living in a beautifully restored Victorian home on Highland Avenue. Scott and Paul immediately took to Charlie, offering him a room and some stability. For the first time in a long while, Charlie had a roof over his head and people who genuinely cared about him. But still, finding work in Bangor proved harder than Charlie expected. Jobs for young gay men were few and far between, and Charlie struggled to make ends meet. At one point, Scott and Paul encouraged him to return to Portsmouth, but the move didn't stick. Eventually, Charlie found his way back to their Highland Avenue home. When he returned, something about him had changed. He was more optimistic, almost hopeful. A kind neighbour helped him land a part-time job through a city employment programme. It wasn't glamorous, just a couple of hours a day cleaning at an adult learning centre, but it gave Charlie structure and a sense of purpose. He also found solace at the local Unitarian church, which openly welcomed gay members. In an era when many churches used their pulpits to condemn homosexuality, the Unitarian Church felt like an oasis. Charlie quickly built a community of friends there, people who accepted him for who he was and shared his hope for a better future. For Charlie, life had never been easy, but in these moments of connection, with Scott and Paul and with his new friends at church, he began to glimpse the kind of life he had always dreamed of. One where he could truly belong, free from judgment and fear. Shortly after Easter, Charlie had saved enough money to move into his own apartment on the 3rd floor of a weathered rooming house on First Street. The building had seen better days, but Charlie wasted no time transforming his small space into a sanctuary. He adorned the walls with colourful posters, tended to potted plants that added a touch of life, and he even adopted a kitten. Despite its shabby exterior, Charlie's charm made the place feel warm and inviting. Plus, the rent was only $35 a week. Gary Baldock, his landlord, spoke highly of him. He said, "He was a good tenant, he was clean, and that's what a landlord looks for in a tenant." Much of Charlie's time was spent in the Unitarian Church, the one place in Bangor where he felt completely free to be himself. In a town without gay bars and where public displays of same-sex affection often resulted in harassment or even expulsion from regular establishments, the church was his refuge. Charlie refused to hide who he was, even if it meant enduring the sting of homophobia. His style was bold and unapologetic. Earrings, shoulder bags, and even the occasional makeup. He often carried a purse tucked confidently under his arm, and sometimes introduced himself as Charlene. Those who loved him described him as flamboyant, a man who celebrated his identity rather than concealing it. Mary Jane Kennedy, one of his friends, recalled her first impression of Charlie. She stated, "The first time I saw him, my first impression was, my God, the Queen Mary just landed. But then I got to know him, and he just wanted to be loved, just loved. He didn't want to hurt anyone, and he didn't want to be hurt." Charlie's openness didn't just make him a target, it also changed minds. Fred Lewis, one of his neighbours, admitted that meeting Charlie transformed his prejudice. He recollected, "Before I met Charlie, I hated gays like everybody else in Bangor. But Charlie changed my mind. He was very soft-hearted and kind. If they sent an angel down from heaven, Charlie would be it. Now I believe God put us together on the same earth, straights and gays, and we have to learn to live together." By the summer of 1984, Charlie Howard was finding joy in his life again. At 23 years old, he had a new boyfriend, a local man named Roy Ogden. On the evening of the 7th of July, the couple attended a potluck dinner hosted by Interweave of Bangor, a gay support group affiliated with the Unitarian Church. True to his vibrant personality, Charlie arrived wearing his signature rainbow-coloured poncho. At about 10:30 p.m. that night, Charlie and Roy decided to stop by the post office to check if Charlie had received any mail. The walk took them towards the State Street Bridge, a 3-lane structure spanning the Kenduskeag stream. The depth of the water below fluctuated with the tide, ranging from a shallow 3 feet in some spots to 16 feet in others. As they reached the bridge, the still night was broken by the sound of a maroon Pontiac Ventura pulling up beside them. Inside were 3 teenage boys and 2 girls. The boys rolled down the windows and began hurling homophobic slurs. Charlie froze for a moment. He recognised the car. A few weeks earlier, the same group had taunted him with similar abuse. The car screeched to a halt and the 3 boys jumped out. Fear surged through Charlie. His chest tightened, not just from panic, but from the asthma that had plagued him since childhood. When one of the boys shoved Roy, the couple took off running. Roy sprinted ahead, but Charlie lagged behind. His breathing laboured. As the teenagers gave chase, the night air seemed to grow heavier around them. Struggling to keep up, Charlie stumbled over the uneven sidewalk and fell. Within moments, they were on him. The boys tackled Charlie to the ground, their fists and feet raining down blows as he curled into himself, trying to shield his body. Roy, who was helpless and terrified, pleaded with the teenagers to stop. But they were relentless. The assault escalated as they hauled Charlie to his feet and dragged him towards the railing of the bridge. Charlie fought back as best he could. His voice rose in desperation as he screamed, "No, no, I can't swim." The teenagers ignored his cries, and with one final act of cruelty, they lifted Charlie over the railing and then threw him into the dark water below. The Kenduskeag stream swallowed Charlie's small frame. The teenagers ran back to the car and sped off as Roy was left standing on the bridge alone. He ran to the railing and screamed as Charlie disappeared beneath the surface. In the immediate aftermath of the attack, Roy ran desperately through the street. He reached a fire alarm box at the corner of State and Exchange Street and pulled it with trembling hands. His only thought was to save Charlie. Moments later, the Bangor Fire Department arrived, their sirens cutting through the still night. Roy, who was frantic and hysterical, rushed to meet them. He screamed that they had been attacked and his boyfriend was thrown into the stream. The firefighters quickly moved to the bridge and scanned the stream below. The drop from the bridge was 20 to 25 feet, and the tide had risen, making the waters deep and dark. But despite their best efforts, they saw no sign of Charlie. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, the fire department launched a boat to search the stream. For 3 long hours they combed the water, their lights cutting through the murky depths. Finally, their efforts ended in heartbreak. Charlie's lifeless body was discovered floating between the State Street bus stop and the stream's footbridge. He was transported to the medical examiner's office where the grim details of his final moments were confirmed. He bore lacerations to his head and face from the brutal attack, but his official cause of death was drowning, compounded by an acute asthma attack. An investigation was immediately launched. Bangor was just a small city, and news of the tragedy spread rapidly. Charlie's death sent shockwaves through the community, his bright and unapologetic presence snuffed out by senseless hatred. But it wasn't long before the 3 teenage boys were identified. After Charlie was hurled from the bridge, Gary Wozniak heard a knock at his front door. It was his 15-year-old next-door neighbour, James Baines, along with 2 of his friends, 17-year-old Daniel Ness and 16-year-old Sean Mabry. Gary had been having a small party, and everybody was sitting in the living room drinking beer. Baines, Ness and Mabry burst in. They were visibly agitated and speaking over one another. "We jumped a fag, beat him up and threw him into the stream," they admitted breathlessly. The adults in the room were sceptical, dismissing the confession as exaggerated teenage bravado. The boys, they figured, were embellishing a story to sound tough. But by the next morning, when news of Charlie's murder was splashed across local headlines, the horrifying truth became clear. Racked with fear or guilt, one of the boys turned themselves in to police that morning. The other 2 initially planned to flee town by hopping on a freight train, but ultimately abandoned the idea and stayed home, where they were soon arrested. In the interrogation room, all 3 boys admitted to their role in the attack, although they all insisted they hadn't intended on killing Charlie, just hurting and scaring him. Their accounts painted a grim picture of a senseless act, fueled by hatred and recklessness. That night, the teenagers had been at a party, before heading out to buy alcohol using a fake ID, carried by one of the girls who accompanied them. They piled into Mabry's maroon Pontiac Ventura, and cruised through Bangor, looking for trouble. At around 10:30 p.m, Baines spotted Charlie and Roy walking down the street arm in arm. He recognised Charlie from a previous encounter and told the others that Charlie had allegedly put an arm around him and made a suggestive comment just weeks earlier. The teenagers decided to confront him. They pulled the car over and approached Charlie and Roy. Ness later recounted to detectives, "I walked up to him and said, 'Hi, how are you doing, fag?' You could tell he was really scared." The verbal harassment quickly escalated into violence. "We just started kicking him," Baines admitted during his interview. Ness became emotional when he described the final moments of the attack, stating, "It was just stupid, very stupid." His voice trembled as he recalled the trio lifting Charlie's battered body off the ground and throwing him over the bridge and into the water below. Detectives wasted no time in labelling the attack a hate crime, making it clear that Charlie had been targeted because of his sexual orientation. As detectives delved into the boys' backgrounds, a pattern emerged. All three had been students at Bangor High School, where they were all known more for their apathy than their achievements. Mabry, once a promising athlete in the City Hockey League and a karate enthusiast, had failed all of his classes and had been removed from the school roll in April for being chronically absent. Ness, who had shown artistic potential, had seen his grades nosedive over the past year. Baines, the youngest, had only joined Bangor High the previous year, but had quickly fallen into the same disinterest as his friends. Dr. John Fahey, the high school principal, summed up the trio's reputation, stating, "They were not typical kids. School didn't seem to hold much importance to them. They didn't attend classes regularly, and they got into trouble." The senseless cruelty of Charlie's murder left Bangor reeling, turning a spotlight on the deep-seated prejudice that had festered within the community. For Charlie, a young man who sought only love and acceptance, the price of being himself had been devastatingly high. The night after his body was pulled from the stream, roughly 200 members of Bangor's gay, lesbian and straight coalition gathered in a powerful display of solidarity. They marched together, wearing purple ribbons and carrying candles, their procession winding through the streets towards the police station. "We wanted to let them know we're out here," one marcher explained. As the group arrived, they raised their voices in unison, chanting, "We are friends of Charlie Howard, and we're singing for his life." Many held placards with poignant messages such as "Prejudice kills" and "Let gays and lesbians live." Though the group lacked the parade permit required by law, Police Sergeant Gregory MacDonald announced that no citations would be issued, a quiet acknowledgement of the gravity of the moment. From the police station, the mourners walked to the State Street Bridge, the site of Charlie's final moments. Standing solemnly at the railing, they tossed roses into the water below. "This is for you, Charlie," they whispered. The march concluded at the Unitarian Church, where a memorial service was held to honour Charlie's life. Reverend Richard Forcier opened the service, telling those in attendance, "Let us pray. Spirit of justice, a grave injustice has been committed in our midst. A brave young man, Charlie Howard, was murdered for openly being who he was." Throughout the service, speakers reflected on the pervasive homophobia in Bangor and the struggles that Charlie had faced. Reverend Douglas Morgan shared that about a month before his death, Charlie had confided in him about considering leaving the town to find a place where he could live more freely. But despite his fears, Charlie had decided to stay, believing that things might get better. Others recounted their own experience of discrimination in the 1980s, a time when homophobia was pervasive. One woman spoke of hearing a colleague mock Charlie's death, while another revealed that the words, "Fags jump here," had been graffitied on the bridge. In that era, societal norms, religious conservatism, and misinformation about LGBTQ+ issues fueled widespread hostility. The AIDS epidemic, often labelled a gay disease, exacerbated discrimination, sparking fear and hatred that left many LGBTQ+ individuals vulnerable to violence and ostracism. In predominantly conservative Maine, discussions of LGBTQ+ rights were rare, and often met with resilience or outright hostility. A friend of Charlie's who wished to remain anonymous described the man that they had lost. "Gentle Charlie wouldn't hurt a fly. How could this happen to him? He was flamboyant, and that's probably why he was a target for harassment. To take the life of this young man who was just beginning to live simply because he's gay is an outrage." Her voice trembled as she added, "Charlie's life will have an impact. We will not let people forget." For those who knew him, Charlie's pride in his identity was both a source of inspiration and a cause for concern. He lived bravely, refusing to hide who he was, even as the world around him remained hostile. Yet the fear of being attacked never really left Charlie, and tragically, that fear was now realised. The day after Charlie Howard's murder, Daniel Ness, Sean Mabry, and James Baines were officially charged. Prosecutor Tom Goodwin announced that he had yet to decide whether the teenagers would be tried as juveniles or adults. To the shock and anger of many, the three were released into the custody of their parents rather than being held in detention. Goodwin defended the decision, stating that he didn't consider the boys a threat to the community. This was a sentiment that enraged members of the LGBTQ+ community, who saw it as a failure to treat the murder with the seriousness that it deserved. Then on July 13th, Charlie was laid to rest in a quiet ceremony. Between 40 to 60 mourners attended, including his mother and two brothers. One of his high school teachers, Robert Lister, spoke at the service, reflecting on the gentle nature of his former student. Charlie was one who showed kindness and respect to others. His philosophy might have been to live and enjoy one day at a time, and let live, he said. At the gravesite in Kittery Cemetery, a brief prayer was said before Charlie's body was lowered into the ground. He was buried without a headstone. In the days following Charlie's funeral, calls for justice and change grew louder. John Preston, a Portland-based gay rights activist, expressed his hope that Charlie's murder would serve as a turning point. He highlighted the urgent need for laws to protect the LGBTQ+ community from discrimination in employment, housing and credit. Governor Joseph Brennan responded with a pledge to support anti-discrimination measures for credit and housing, but he stopped short of endorsing protections in employment. While the governor's response was seen as insufficient, Charlie's death sparked a movement that would eventually lead to significant progress. In Bangor, the local school committee created a tolerance subcommittee and adopted recommendations to prevent discrimination based on sexual orientation in hiring practices. Statewide, Charlie's murder inspired the founding of the Maine Lesbian and Gay Political Alliance, now known as Equality Maine. This organisation became a driving force in advancing LGBTQ+ rights across the state. Their efforts led to a crucial amendment to the Maine Civil Rights Act, which added sexual orientation to the list of protected categories. On the 18th of July, Baines, Mabry and Ness were arraigned in court on charges of murder, and each pleaded not guilty. The courtroom was surrounded by protests, with many demanding justice for Charlie. Among the demonstrators was Roy Ogden, Charlie's boyfriend, who voiced frustration with the system after an incident involving Baines. Roy claimed that he had seen Baines downtown unsupervised, which was a breach of his bail conditions. According to Roy, Baines had shouted, "Hey faggot," at him, but when Roy reported it to the Bangor Police Department, no action was taken. Police Sergeant Thomas Placella dismissed Roy's allegations, stating that they had been investigated and deemed without merit. In a controversial comment, Placella added, "I'm not trying to lessen the severity of the crime, but it's not like these were axe murderers. These people came from respectable families who own property in the city of Bangor." The next month, the three teenagers appeared in court once more. Judge David Cox faced criticism when he refused to confine them for psychiatric testing, opting instead for local evaluations and once again releasing them into the custody of their parents. Despite public outrage over the leniency of these decisions, the community found some solace when prosecutors announced their intention to try the teenagers as adults. The decision to seek adult prosecution was met with mixed reactions. Anne Phibbs, representing the Bangor area coalition of lesbians, gay men and straights, supported the move, stating, "I think it shows the state is taking this seriously. If they're going to commit an adult crime like murder, they should be treated like adults." Others, however, believed the crime was not premeditated and argued for juvenile court. Local resident Shari Oakes shared her perspective, stating, "I just think they expected to see him in a week or so and say, 'Haha, we threw you over the bridge.'" During the preliminary hearing, Judge Cox ruled that there was sufficient evidence for the teenagers to stand trial for murder. The courtroom listened to the boys' recorded confessions and the testimony of the two teenage girls who had been in the car that night with them. Jennifer, one of the girls, recounted the disturbing aftermath of the attack. She testified that the boys had laughed and even shook hands after throwing Charlie into the water. She recalled asking them, "What if the guy dies?" To which they confidently replied, "He won't die." Then in September, Judge Cox dealt a blow to the prosecution by ruling that the boys would instead be tried in juvenile court, rejecting the motion to charge them as adults. He reasoned that the three teenagers had no prior criminal records and that the punishment available in juvenile court would suffice. This decision sparked outrage, especially among LGBTQ+ advocates. Richard Steinman, a spokesperson for the Augusta Gay Straight Coalition, expressed concern that the ruling might trivialise Charlie's murder. He stated, "I hope this decision doesn't send the message that a life taken due to prejudice is worth any less." The ruling was a bitter reminder of the systemic inequalities that Charlie's death had brought to light. The tragedy, and the legal proceedings that followed, underscored the urgent need for societal change and justice for the LGBTQ+ community. On the 2nd of October, James Baines, Sean Mabry and Daniel Ness returned to court, where they pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of manslaughter. Prosecutor Tom Goodwin explained that the decision was not part of a plea agreement, but was made independently after he reviewed the case. He stated that the teenagers' actions reflected recklessness or criminal negligence rather than intent. Under Maine's juvenile code, manslaughter carried a maximum penalty of incarceration at the Maine Youth Centre until the age of 21. The reduction in charges, however, deeply upset the LGBTQ+ community, who viewed it as a devaluation of Charlie Howard's life. In response, about 50 people gathered to protest, wearing purple armbands in solidarity. They marched to the courthouse and formed a circle and sang, "We are gentle, angry people. We are singing for our lives." Then on October 5th, the teenagers returned to court to be sentenced. Witnesses, including their tutor, Susan Sands, testified in their favour, describing them as model students. Psychologist Dr. David Booth recommended that they be placed in a group home rather than a juvenile detention facility. Each of the boys addressed the court, expressing regret for their actions. Mabry said, "I'd like to let you and everybody else know that I regret what happened. The more I think about it, the more I wish I could turn back time. But I can't, so I stand here ready to accept responsibility for my actions." Baines followed, stating, "I realise what I did was wrong and I'm very sorry. This is an accident that can't be taken back." Finally, Ness admitted, "It was very unforgiving. My actions caused the death of a human being. I'm very sorry my actions has caused Charlie Howard's family and friends to feel the way that they do." Prosecutor Goodwin then read a statement from Charlie's mother, Patience Howard. In it, she expressed doubt about the teenagers' remorse and said, "I believe all three should be institutionalised for a period of time so they can think about what they did." Judge David Cox then addressed the courtroom, acknowledging the complexities of the case while condemning the prejudice and intolerance that had contributed to the crime. He emphasised that while one life had ended, 3 others were irrevocably altered by the events of that night. The teenagers began to cry as Judge Cox announced their sentence: an indeterminate stay at the Maine Youth Centre, not to exceed Ness's 21st birthday on the 28th of June 1988. He specified no minimum term, leaving the decision on their release to the facility's discretion. Outside of court, Prosecutor Goodwin estimated that they would likely serve around 18 months, but stressed that the ultimate decision would be made by the youth centre officials. The lenient sentencing left many members of the LGBTQ+ community disheartened. While the teenagers were now being held accountable, the reduction of charges and relatively short sentences seemed to underscore the systemic inequalities that enabled the tragedy in the first place. Information about the teenagers' juvenile records remained sealed, but it was later reported that James Baines was released after serving 2 years, while Sean Mabry was released after 22 months. It's presumed that Daniel Ness, the oldest, was released first. In 1993, nearly a decade after Charlie Howard's murder, Baines broke his silence and gave an interview, revealing how the crime had shaped his life and the steps he had taken to confront his past. After his release, Baines decided to remain in Bangor, determined to use his story to educate others about intolerance. He became an outspoken advocate, frequently speaking to students, law enforcement officers, and community groups about the devastating consequences of hate crimes. During one seminar, Baines reflected on his motivations on the night of the murder, stating, "I don't think I was ever homophobic." He admitted that his actions were driven by a desire for acceptance and popularity among his peers. He recalled thinking, "My friends will look up to me for this, and I'll be able to talk about it in school for a couple of years." He added that at the time, they believed they would get away with it simply because society viewed harassment and violence against gay people as acceptable. Baines' candidness and regret left a lasting impression on those who heard him speak. Sergeant Michael Harriman, who attended one of his talks at Thornton Academy, stated, "I'll tell you, Jim Baines started talking and put those students on the edge of their seats. It was powerful." Baines also appeared in a state police video aimed at teaching teenagers about tolerance and even shared his story on MTV. In these appearances, he emphasised, "I'm not seeking forgiveness. I can never be forgiven for what I did, but I can try and convince kids not to wreck lives." When reflecting on the night of Charlie's murder, Baines expressed profound shame, admitting, "It happened so fast. It was just supposed to be a good prank, you know. Tell our friends that we scared the homo, that he crawled out soaking wet." In the aftermath, Baines struggled with the public perception of him as a symbol of hatred and a murderer. He revealed that he was so overcome with guilt that he prayed nightly to die in his sleep. After serving his sentence, Baines returned to Bangor High School and secured a job at an electrical supply company where he remained employed. In a collaboration with a family friend, Ed Armstrong, Baines began working on a manuscript that recounted his story and the lessons that he had learned. True to his promise, the book, which was titled Penitence, was published in 1994, and all profits were directed to a scholarship fund at Charlie's High School in Portsmouth and a foundation aimed at fostering cultural tolerance. Baines continued his advocacy work by speaking to the Maine legislature, urging them to pass anti-discrimination laws protecting the LGBTQ+ community. Addressing lawmakers, he declared, "We attacked Charlie Howard because he was different. Only because he was different. We had no right to inflict violence. We had no right to make him our victim, and his family our victims, and our family our victims." While Baines embraced his role as an advocate, Ness and Mabry have been far less vocal about their involvement. Ness has declined all interview requests. However, in 1994, the same year that Baines's book was published, Mabry spoke publicly for the very first time. In his statement, he expressed deep regret, stating, "Not a day goes by that I don't think about Charlie Howard. Charlie was so young, he was helpless that night, and 3 reckless kids come along, and just for the hell of it toss him over the bridge. Because of our actions, Charlie Howard lost his life." In 2009, on the 25th anniversary of Charlie Howard's murder, the city of Bangor came together to honour his memory and reflect on the changes his tragic death had inspired. A series of events marked the week, including religious services, concerts, workshops, and the dedication of a memorial near the site where Charlie drowned. Governor John Baldacci addressed the impact of Charlie's death on Maine, stating, "If you were living in Bangor in 1984, you could never forget Charlie Howard's death. I didn't know Charlie Howard, but his death had a profound impact on the entire community." At the time of Charlie's death, the response from Maine's religious leaders had been largely muted, with the Unitarian Church standing as the only institution to hold a vigil. In the years that followed, however, this silence began to shift. Religious leaders such as Reverend Marvin Ellison, a professor of Christian ethics at Bangor Theological Seminary, began addressing the harm caused by anti-gay teachings. He remarked, "Because religion has long been associated with anti-gay sentiment, people of faith in every tradition must critique and discard those religious teachings. Charlie's memory has become a lasting symbol of tolerance and inclusion in Bangor. July 7th is now observed as Diversity Day, and each year a floral wreath is placed into the stream where Charlie lost his life." The events of that tragic night in 1984 are remembered not just as a moment of mourning, but as a catalyst for change. That year, Maine made a historic step forward when the state legislature passed, and Governor Baldacci signed a law allowing same-sex couples to marry. As the community gathered to honour Charlie's memory, many reflected on the profound influence his death had on advancing LGBTQ+ rights and acceptance in Maine. Governor Baldacci captured this sentiment, stating, "Would Maine be where it is today if Charlie Howard hadn't been thrown into Kenduskeag stream and allowed to die? I don't know. I'd like to think we could have advanced our thinking without a tragedy like his death. But I also believe the events of July 7, 1984 forced us to confront hate and started us along the path towards becoming a more tolerant and open community." Well, besties, that is it for this episode of Morbidology. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I'd like to say a massive thank you to my newest supporters up on Patreon, Lucy, Iris and Alison. The link to Patreon is in the show notes if you'd like to join, or alternatively you can just search for Morbidology on the app or the website. I upload ad-free and early release episodes behind the scenes, and I also send out merch and a handwritten thank you card. Remember to check us out at morbidology.com for more information about this episode and to read our true crime articles. Until next time, take care of yourselves, stay safe, and have an amazing week.